Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the Illinois State Water Survey at the U of I. Uh, Welcome to our webinar today at WellCare 101, What You Need to Know to Protect Your Family. This is part of a series. We do this webinar 2 or 3 times a year for all the new folks who've joined the private well class or who are just heard of us. And I want to mention that this funding for our program comes from EPA, US EPA, through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and we are a partner with RCAP. And they have staff in every state that can help well owners with issues. They can put on workshops and do a lot of things. And yeah, it's been a pretty good program. We're in our 12th year. So again, this is part of a national program implemented through RCAP and their staff in their 6 regions. The materials today follow the lessons for the class, but the webinar is not the private well class per se. It's the private well class is a 10-lesson asynchronous class that you sign up via email, and it sends you a lesson once a week as an attachment or PDF. These are meant to support those lessons as well as give you an opportunity to ask specific questions, which you're able to do when you registered. We will have time at the end for follow-up questions. So if you do have any questions as we go through the material today, feel free to put your question in either your chat box or question box on your GoToWebinar window. Katie's monitoring that and we'll follow up and we'll pull those out at the end. And we're willing to stay and answer questions as long as you all are willing to ask. So yeah. So if you're here for also getting continuing education credit, you're an EHP or can use NEHA's LEHP credit, know that this has been repeated. We did it in November last year and April the year earlier last year. And so if you've, as an example, it's a 2-year credentialing cycle. So if you take it today, you wouldn't be eligible to get credit for this again until after 6/1/27 in 2 years. So it depends on when your credentialing cycle starts and ends, obviously. And then we are also an Illinois LEHP provider. We're in Illinois. We work closely with our state health department. And so we've managed to do that. We are a pretty small group. We aren't able to do that for every state, unfortunately. But if you're looking for, you can get a certificate of attendance, a copy of the slide deck, or the NEHA forms, which should be attachments today. You can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. We do record these webinars, and they're on our YouTube channel and on our privatewellclass.org webpage. You can't get credit for watching the recording. You have to be here today live in order to get any CE approval. I know there's at least a couple states that allow drillers to take these lessons online and get credit. Just email us and we'll send you a certificate. Just tell us what you need. If you don't email us, we don't automatically send you a certificate. We also ask in the registration, if you want a certificate, that's the best place to do that for future reference. And but yeah, if you didn't think you wanted a certificate and decide you do, you can email us at that email address. So RCAP, they're kind of the boots on the ground part of all the private well program. They're made up of 6 nonprofits that are regional in scope. So we're in Illinois, so we're part of the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership, or that's the area that or the organization that covers Illinois. So there are 4 or 6 staff in Illinois that work for Great Lakes Community Action Partnership that are part of the RCAP team. They have about 300 staff in total around the country. There's a portion of those in each of the regions that work on private well issues. And so there's one lead that we deal with in each of the 6 regions. And when somebody asks us a question or says, hey, I'd like to do a well assessment, we forward that to the appropriate RCAP region that covers the state where you live. And so we can reach out to them for you if you want to email us at the same email address. Here's their information if you want to look them up yourself. All 6 have a private well webpage. If you go to the national office's webpage, which is just rcap.org, you can find the private well program under environmental programs. And then there's a link to the pages at each of the 6 regional websites as well. It's a great program. It's all funded. So like an assessment to come out to your home and evaluate what kind of vulnerabilities you might have, it's completely free. They give great advice. They're well experts. They've looked at a lot of wells, and as someone who's also looked at a lot of wells, every situation's a little bit different. And so, your well may look like your neighbor's, but there's always something, whether it's the type of pipes in your home or what you're storing near your well, or whatever it might be, that every well and home tends to be unique. So this assessment program, they've done about 3,800 of these so far around the country. And in some cases, it's requested by a state or local health agency that really doesn't have the staff to go out and do those sorts of things. And I mean, they are limited how many they can do in a year, but they try to accommodate well owners who really have a need, and also the agencies that request that help. So the other thing they do, I mentioned developing partnerships here. So if your state or your county is doing efforts to do outreach or education, or working with private well owners in your jurisdiction or area, RCAP can support that. They'll participate in events. They will put together workshops, find speakers, advertise it for you. I know between them and our program, we've traveled the country doing workshops for local groups, county level groups for extension or whatever. And so you should lean on them if you would like that kind of support. Again, it's all free. Yeah, and again, they've developed extensive experience over the last 10 years that we've been doing this work, and have seen about everything you can see. Yeah, we've seen some crazy pictures of wells that things I've never seen before in my 30 plus years. So it's pretty interesting how different they can be. So I work at the State Water Survey, and most people have never heard of it. It's part of the campus at the U of I under the Prairie Research Institute, but the Water Survey was started by our state legislature in 1895, so we're 130 years old this year, because of cholera and typhoid, basically. They were just learning that it was a waterborne issue. And so the first thing that the newly formed Water Survey did was test the waters of Illinois, meaning both surface waters and public water supplies and all the wells that those public water supplies use. And it's grown into a much larger agency that does applied research, does outreach and education, collects a lot of data. We have monitoring wells all over the state. We house the state's well logs. And through that, we help well owners, certainly in Illinois, but these days, because of this program around the country, with the issues they have related to their wells. And so it's really actually a cool place to work. It's a sister agency to our state geological survey and natural history survey, archaeological survey, all those sorts of things. And then now we're no longer considered a state agency. We're under the umbrella of the U of I as an institute. But we have many of the same functions through state statute. Just a couple of pictures to talk about our history and how cool some of this stuff is. We did a lot of investigations of typhoid. I mentioned this is a diagram somebody hand drew from, I want to say this is, I guess it's 1910, it looks like on the graph. But it talks about when they started using filters in plants and developing treatment options to make the water cleaner and safer. And you can see what happened with the typhoid. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You go back and look at all this stuff. There's all these glass plates. These are actually 2.5 by 3.5 maybe glass plate slides. And this one's from 1913. It's broken. But it still looks really cool, and it's an investigation of a dairy route. because a lot of times milk's stored in the same large container. People use buckets to get the milk out. So this is a dairy route, and they were investigating how many of those cases came from that, and what days they happen. So the 112th case was on September 10th, but there were only 8 there that were part of that. So it wasn't necessarily the source. So yeah, just a lot of cool old stuff we have related to well drilling. Weldon's a small town in central Illinois. Well rigs look a lot different today, and I think I'll show you a picture of one actually. So today, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and Katie Buckley is taking your questions and works with the all the CE stuff as well. I neglected to put Erin Huggett and Sally Dolan on here. I don't know why. I guess I just skipped over that this month. They both are research scientists here who help with our help center and other activities related to our private well program, as well as also on our, we have a septic or on-site wastewater program as well. So the thing to remember as a well owner is your well isn't regulated, especially the water quality. There are some states that regulate if you sell your house or sell your home, your property, and it has a well on it, you have to test, and it has to meet what the EPA defines for a public water supply, but that's very rare. I mean, it just isn't, most states don't require that. So once a well's been put in service, you're on your own. And that's the thing to remember is, you know, public water supply's treated, it's tested, it has a licensed operator that maintains the system and makes sure things are done properly. And that doesn't happen for a private home on a well. And the other thing about well water is I hear all the time, well, my water tastes great, it looks clear. Arsenic is colorless, odorless, and has no taste. And it's a common element in the Earth's crust. It's common in groundwater and aquifers, and it's common in some aquifers in many states. And it has health effects, which is why it's regulated by the EPA, the federal EPA, for public water supplies. But so you can't go by how it looks, smells, or tastes. You really need to test. And I grew up on an old dug well that honestly was would have never meet, especially the bacteria requirements. It was probably always positive for coliform and possibly E. coli. But now I live in town and I pay, this says $60, $80. Boy, that keeps going up. It's probably closer to $90 a month now. But that's the price for my house to have, when I turn on my tap, I have safe water. I know it's been tested. There's always water pressure. I don't have a pump going out in the middle of the night. In our well house, we kept a propane tank in our little well house because if our power went out, then our pump wouldn't work and it could freeze the lines and you know, and burst pipes in our well house. So you had to be ready. Anytime the power went out, we had to go down and turn on that propane tank to keep that building warm, so things didn't freeze. And as far as this last bullet here, I find that the 2 biggest reasons for well problems and well water quality problems are poor well construction and also a lack of knowledge of well owners on how to take care of their well. And the poor well construction thing is a major issue because whenever states started adopting well code, which there's still 2 states that do not have a well code, it requires certain kinds of installation, a licensed driller, using the right types of materials, making sure it's sealed properly near the surface to protect from surface runoff, all those things. But any well that was already in existence is grandfathered in. So like the well I grew up on was hand dug by my grandfather in 1933. I grew up on a small farm. And that well is not in our logs. It's not, there's no record of it other than what I've put in there. And, you know, it was never reviewed in any way to see if it was safe to use, but that's just the way things were. So there's many of those wells still out there all over the country, or people using wells that aren't safe, like sand points, or getting water from a spring. Those are connected to surface water and they're much more vulnerable. And so you need to be careful using those kind of supplies. So as far as your well goes, really the considerations are about depth and source. By source, I mean what aquifer you're getting your water from, where it's at on the landscape. If it's in a floodplain, you need to be aware that if that ever floods and overtops your well, it's likely going to contaminate it. For instance, understanding the flow direction. It's not apparent or obvious. If your well is shallow and it's connected to the water table, then the flow direction's likely following the landscape. But if it's a deeper aquifer, then it doesn't necessarily do that. It could flow in the opposite direction. You could live on, you could live in a subdivision out in the country that slopes down towards a lake, and the water table, you dig down 8 feet and you hit water in the clay. It's not an aquifer. It's just it's saturated. The flow direction is going to be towards the lake. But if you go down further and hit an aquifer, the flow direction could be any other direction. And that matters depending on what sources are up gradient from you. And that's why we mention it. And then also just protecting the area around your well. Not storing things nearby, not, making sure that it's not in a location that's going to flood, all that sort of stuff. So as far as correcting poor well construction, as I mentioned, well code in Illinois was first established in 1968, so way more than 30 plus years. But old wells were grandfathered in. We still find wells that are in pits where, in a cold climate where you have a frost line and freezing in the winter, wells were put in a pit so that they wouldn't freeze in the winter. And so those are totally unsafe. They can flood if there's a heavy rainstorm. And when we just maybe 10 years ago, we did some work where we went out and inventoried wells in 9 townships, so a little over 320 square miles or so. And we found probably 50 or 60 out of 1,500 wells that were still in pits, which really surprised me, because in the 60s, they invented a pitless adapter that allows you to have your pipe extend all the way up to the surface, and that's really the best choice there. And then again, there's still many old hand dug wells that are still in use, like the one I grew up on is still in use. And having an old dug well or a well in a pit provides not only an opportunity for surface contamination of your well and even the aquifer, but it's also a safety hazard. It can really be a problem. So the top picture on the top left here is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. And this, they had a blog for a while, and they're the state agency that regulates well drillers and well construction in Washington State. So they had a blog about some of the parts of their program, and they had several instances where they showed pictures of things like this. There's a rotting piece of plywood on top of this well. It's in a little well house. You can see the wall kind of in the very background, but you also see a lot of the, it looks like insulation, that gray stuff that's on the floor. There's a funnel there for probably putting oil in the pump, in the motor, and a woman stepped on that and fell through. She's probably stepped on that 1,000 times, and this time it broke and it killed her. But this is a very poor way to have your water supply, just because stuff is sloughing off, getting in the water all the time. Obviously, if there's any bugs or critters that get in there, they're going to fall in. And speaking of that, on the upper right here, Don Kelderman was in Southern Illinois at the same time I was, researching his family history. I was there for a meeting. We just happened to run into each other, and he showed me this picture. This is an old brick-lined well where someone took a concrete culvert and put it vertically in the top of the well, but it's only about a foot above land surface and it's not covered. So as he was traipsing around the countryside, he found this, and there's no home there anymore. But this is a goat from a nearby farm that had made its way over there and managed to fall in, looking for a drink or what it might have ever been. But this seems like an exaggeration, and it really is not. I can't tell you how many times we've seen frogs, snakes, small, rats, all those things fall in a well. And so it's just not safe not to have a sanitary well cap and a type of well that you can seal at the surface. And the picture at the bottom, Walt Kelly was the head of our groundwater section when this picture was taken. this was a project to sample dug and bored wells, which are the large diameter wells that are shallow, for pesticides and ag chemicals, as well as fertilizers. And this is one of the wells in our study. This is in a cattle pasture, and so it looks muddy here in the foreground because the cattle come up to this to these posts, and they use them to scratch. They're rubbing posts for them, and they're also doing their business there, and that's infiltrating right into the ground and getting in this shallow brick lined well. You know, that's the problem, is the way they're constructed. You know, water can get in right at the surface, and the frog story actually is from, at least one of them is from my own well, or my parents' well. So what do you need to do here? You need to bring them up to code if you can. That's the best thing to do. Have someone evaluate, a contractor or a driller, what that will take. If it's a well in a pit, you can extend a pipe up to the surface and put in a pitless adapter. And what that basically does is elbow your water line so that it can go into the house at a depth that's below where there might be a freeze line and a frost line, so that you don't have to worry about your pipes freezing. And fill those in. Fill in either your well or your pit, so that you're not having surface infiltration. And if you need help, extension, well authority in your state, talk to your county health department. It really depends on the state, who is the best person to talk to. Well owners in Illinois contact us, as well as extension, as well as our county health departments. We all kind of work together, but in some states there may be one group that you need to contact to find out what you can do to fix that, so to speak. Same way with abandoned wells. Because well logs weren't required to be filed in most states until the 60s, many a lot later, and again, some states not at all. There are many more wells out there than we have on file in all the state records or county records or local jurisdiction records if it's a health district. So like a well in a pit, it's a safety hazard having an old abandoned well nearby. And so if you do, the best thing to do is to have it properly sealed. And so it's called abandoning the well, but many of those are just left open with a piece of plywood or something over them. You read about that stuff happening where someone gets hurt, or even people who throw stuff into that hole in the ground thinking, well, that's a good place to dispose of my pesticide containers or my oil cans or whatever it might be. So here's some more pictures, and these two pictures on the left are both also from the Washington State Department of Ecology. One is an old abandoned well that went on the top, and they're trying to get a horse out. And the second one, a guy was just walking in his backyard, and there was grass over the top of it. It'd been there, no one knew it was there forever, and he fell through and fell 45 feet into a well. This particular gentleman, they pulled him out and he walked away. Super fortunate. And the newspaper clippings here on the left are all from the 90s, when everything wasn't available on the internet. And these are all three of these are in Illinois, in different areas of the state. And the third one is the Jessica McClure story, which if you remember and you're old enough, she fell into a well in Midland, Texas. And it took over a day. I don't remember how far, but she was like 22 feet down, and it was I believe it was an iron cased well, and it took them well over a day to get her out. Now she's a mother of three. It ended well, but it doesn't for everyone. So as far as basic well care, in Illinois, you're allowed to drill your own well on your own property, but you're not allowed to drill one for anyone else without a driller's license. There's a good reason for that. You see some areas of the state where you can put in sand points, which you can go to the hardware store and buy the equipment to put in a sand point. It's where the area is really sandy, the water table is very shallow. These tend to be agricultural areas and areas where there's a lot of livestock. And so people are pulling water from 10 or 20 feet below land surface where there's sandy soil to surface that everything infiltrates. They may be using stuff on their lawn. There's ag chemicals being applied, and they're using that for their water supply to get by with a cheap water supply. But you get what you pay for. Unless you have experience and are someone who could drill a well, we certainly recommend you use a licensed driller, pump installer, or contractor. it's just it's your family's safety, and it can't be stressed enough. You know, we've had to talk to folks who found out they had cancer, which is really heartbreaking, and they want to blame their old well and the farm field right next to their well. And by that time, it's way too late. They needed to do something way before to make sure they had a safe water supply. So, and I grew up on a farm on an old dug well. It may catch up to me someday. I have no idea, but I know we did a lot of things. This is in the 70s and early 80s that weren't safe. Spraying for weeds and insects around buildings without a mask, without gloves. And that's the way things were done back then. I didn't know any better, and my dad didn't either. So it's important to understand those. I think we have a lot more knowledge and education now. Trying to find out more about your well is certainly a good first step in understanding the things you need to do. And that's also why we're here, is to help answer those questions. And that's why we have our help center, which I'll get to closer to the end. Most states have some kind of guide and rules related to well drilling. There's 2 states that don't, Pennsylvania and Alaska. There's been a lot of efforts in both states to try to get that done. And there's just not legislative will, which is really sad, in my opinion. But you can look at some of these books or brochures or whatever they might be from other states, and several states have what's called a well owner handbook. Texas, there's a number of states that do, and it's really meant for the homeowner to understand the basics. We reference some of those things, like the Texas one. In some of our materials for the private well class, we used some of their figures. They have a lot of good information in them. But every state that does regulate drillers and well construction has a rules book that talks about the rules. I know in Illinois, they have a panel that includes drillers that work with our Department of Public Health, and they update those rules every so often when it's necessary, when they learn something new. Even the construction of large diameter wells has changed since I've been involved with groundwater and well work in the state to the betterment of protecting public health. So as far as basic well care, really it's about, this is a well elevated, we've got a sanitary cap. I would want to see this particular well have a little more mounding around the well. So when there is a heavy rainstorm, water doesn't sit next to it, it runs away, because eventually it's going to clear a spot along the outside of the casing. And that can lead to, I don't know how deep this well is. If it's 200 feet deep and it's grouted properly, which is the clay material or concrete you put around the casing in the borehole to keep water from going in around that. That's great. But if it's a shallower well and it wasn't well done, or it's older, you don't necessarily have records that tell you if it was grouted or not. And that's a potential source for sure. So you can, the screen should have a vent if it's a screen cap. It needs to be elevated so that there's no risk of ponding around the well in a really heavy rainstorm. These days especially, we're seeing more and more 2-inch and above rainstorms. I know we had one last fall that was 4 inches in maybe 2 hours in our area, and it overwhelms everything. There's communities that are in flat ground in Illinois that have never flooded, that in the last few years have, completely flooded. A small town just north of here had, I want to say they had 10 or 11 inches of rain over 24 hours. It was just the direction of the storms were following in a line like a train, and they kept hitting this one spot, and the entire area was flooded. So if your well's not elevated, or if it's in a pit, or it's a dug well that's counting on near surface infiltration, it's going to get contaminated for sure. The other thing is, and this, I use a lot of Minnesota materials because one, they're well funded, and so they put a lot of effort into their private well program. And as a state agency, they provide a lot of great resources to help the citizens in Minnesota that we can then piggyback on and use ourselves. I was on a call just yesterday with some public health people from a number of different states, And several of them mentioned, yeah, we steal Minnesota's resources all the time because they've been able to put out a lot of good stuff. So I'm using theirs here, but most states that have well construction code have rules on setback distances, and that's what this is showing. So, the common things like a septic tank, in Minnesota, it's 50 feet. In Illinois, it's 75 feet, I believe. But there's a whole list of things here, some you might not even think about being a problem, that you don't want next to your well. And we've seen wells in a garage or in a basement. That's a really poor way to have your water supply. Yeah, it needs to be isolated. There's so many things that can influence it. And some of that depends on the well itself and how it was constructed and how much solid pipe there is before it's either opening up into a bedrock unit or it reaches the screen for a sand and gravel unit. All that stuff matters. But the best thing to do is to have nothing near your well. And this is just the bottom half of that same figure. I want to make sure it was readable. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can affect a well. And animal feedlot, it says 100 feet. A feedlot isn't a pasture. A pasture has grass growing. Like if you have cattle in a pasture, they've got a lot of area. They've got plenty of food. A feedlot is the area that's fenced in near a building that typically, like if there's feeder cattle in that or pigs, it's going to be mud. And it may be, 6 inches or a foot of mud. And I can't tell you how many dug wells that I've sampled where the well was actually in a feedlot. And, it's pretty disheartening to see that and understand that, that's likely always contaminated. As far as the other thing that matters a lot is your septic system. A lot of times when there's coliform problems in a well and it's habitual, it keeps happening, even after you've tried to chlorinate and disinfect the well, it could be that there's a connection to your septic field. And that can happen because it's too close or because the material near the well is very porous and allows that flow, or it could just be bad luck. I mean, sometimes, especially in a glacial environment, the glacial till that's on top of bedrock can be sand and gravel or clay or silt. In some cases, there may be a really thin sand lens that's providing all the water to the well, but that same sand lens, it might only be even a few inches or a foot thick, goes some distance in every direction. And that's also where your septic drain field is eventually discharging, not necessarily straight to it, but it's infiltrating down through the material that's supposed to clean it, and it becomes a pathway. Because as you pump your well and you lower the water level, it induces flow towards the well through that sand lens. So as far as the septic to-do list, the same things, you maintain the area around your tank and your drain field. Don't drive over it, don't put trees on it, don't concrete it, any of those things. If it compresses the soil, and that compaction creates problems with flow, and so it can shorten the life of your drain field, which, if you're in a rural subdivision and you have, only a 3/4 of an acre lot, you may not have another place to put a second drain field. That's always been an issue. And what'll happen then is, instead of having a natural system, you'll have to put in an advanced on-site system for wastewater that basically treats the water. It's much more expensive. And there's some areas where there's vulnerable geology where you have to do that anyway, because it's not safe and it can contaminate the aquifer. So, and the other thing is, don't put anything down. Reduce the flow as much as you can. I mean, a septic tank especially does its job, but it shouldn't have a sump pump going to it, or whirlpools or softener backwash, just because that's a lot of flow, and it's a lot of flow very often. And a septic tank works because of the natural bacteria that are in a tank and can break down the material that comes into it. If there's too much flow, it won't have time to break that stuff down before it's trying to get out the other side into the distribution field. And so it's better to reduce the flow as much as you can. Same thing, garbage disposals, those solids will not break down in your septic tank. The bugs don't have enough time to break down, tomato peelings and carrot peelings and anything else. So if you have a garbage disposal, the rule of thumb is you should decrease the amount of time between pumping your tank in half. So if you have a tank that's sized for, either 3 bedrooms or 4 people, and it's a 1,000-gallon tank, there's a chart there or a septic person who can tell you how often you probably need to pump that. And that's pumping out the solids, because you have to do that. And and if you put man-made things in there, like, your kid had the flu and you used amoxicillin, or, for example, but whatever it might be, it kills bacteria. So you don't want to put it in your septic tank. So don't flush those things down the toilet, because that's a lot of people do some of those things. Inspect your tank to measure solids. So a tank should be no more than 60% full. And that's not something the typical person would know how to do. But have call a septic company, ask them to come out and measure the solids and find out where your tank's at. And I say that assuming that you know where your tank is and you have access through a port, because I run into a lot of well owners who contact us and say, I don't even know where my septic tank is. Those are things you need to know. And you should pump your tank on a regular schedule, whether it's every 2 years, 4 years, whatever it might be, to make sure it doesn't get full. Because if it gets full of solids and that gets anywhere in the distribution line on the other side, it'll plug it up and it'll basically ruin your whole drain field. And then when that happens, it's either going to back up into your house or it's going to come out through the tank. And now you're talking a significant amount of money, more than a car, to get all that fixed and put in place so that it's functioning properly again. Okay, well, I lost here. So one of the best sources of information is EPA's website. And, in a lot of cases, I get frustrated with EPA's website on a number of things related to community water supplies because it's so difficult to navigate. But the septic page and the decentralized on-site system page, which is just another term for all that, because not everything is a septic tank, is really well done. And there's a ton of information there. And we've been involved and helped with like Septic Smart Week for the last 7 or 8 years. They've allowed us to be on a committee, and it's an important thing to raise awareness on how a septic system works, our decentralized system. And so it's just epa.gov/septic. And I encourage you, if you have an on-site system, whether that be just a septic tank in a drain field, or you're removing nitrates or BOD or whatever, or chlorinating, doing any kind of advanced treatment, there's information here in this. So as you go through these pages, I'm not going to go through many, because next month, Sally Dolan is on our team, is doing our annual septic webinar. And so she'll cover a lot more material than I am here. I'm just trying to give you an overview of some of the basics. So when you go to that page, then you can click on how septic, or about septic systems. It gives you a good overview. Then there's a lot of things on the left side here that you can click on to go down further. Tells you how they work if you're not sure what a conventional system is, which is basically a tank, a septic tank, and a drain field. There's a lot of variations on that. There are, I learned when we first started doing our well assessments that in some states you can have a lagoon for your wastewater treatment at a home. To pump to a small lake or pond and then have to pump that out, it really surprised me, but it is legal and we do have them occur. And so you can understand all those things. And like I said, this has just got a lot of really great information. As far as, whether you have a conventional system or, there's a lot of alternative systems where either, like the picture here is a mounded system. And that's because there's not enough earth material to bury this just our drain field. It goes to rock right away, and the aquifer is close to the surface. And so like in Massachusetts, I'll use them as a good example. They've got some really strict rules. If you don't have enough earth material, that the water coming out of the drain field, out of your septic tank or system, can percolate and infiltrate for natural bacteria to break it down further and basically clean it so it's not harming the environment, then you have to create a mounded system. So you're putting artificial earth material for it to go through before it can get into the native material. So there's just a lot of things that can come up, and that's unique to your situation. And that's why most states, either their local health district or their county health department, inspect. They license the folks that install these. They have to have an approved plan in place, all that stuff before it ever goes in. You do see sometimes where someone has a very old system. It may be an old water tank that they've stuck in the ground, or I mean, it's just amazing sometimes what folks do to get by without spending money when it's not understanding the risk that they're creating. There's a whole series of things on care and maintenance and why you need to pump, all those things. And then there's also information about how it can affect water, which is why we're here, really, right? We want to know if our septic system could be impacting our well. And so as you scroll down this page, there's one is about protecting your drinking water well. And so if I click on that, this particular section, it talks about it's got numbers for every particular part of both your drinking water well and your septic tank and drain field on what can happen. And the bottom of that diagram kind of shows you the flow directions. And if the groundwater flow happens to be in the direction of your well, if the drain field and there isn't enough material to really keep it from getting to an aquifer or the well field, it could eventually impact your well. And in some cases, like I said, there's just only a little bit of aquifer material where the water can move much faster, and it can run through that a lot quicker than it would the rest of the earth materials. And so when that happens, it can contaminate a well. And so that's why you need to test as well. And so I clicked on 9, could my well be affected? And it gives you kind of a laundry list of things to consider. As far as technical resources, there's a lot of good information. Again, even on advanced systems, if you're in an area like along the lake in northern New York State, there it's bedrock and the aquifer are at the surface. There's a lot of advanced systems that have to go in. You can't just put in a septic tank and a drain field and discharge that way. You have to basically clean the water first. And so those advanced technologies have grown. They're more common. There's companies that focus on those. Folks are trained that actually install them on all that stuff. And so there's a lot of good resources here. And if you get to the webinars page, there's a lot of webinars that they've done. Most of these are dated. The latest one was in 21, but they've got a lot of really good material there. And it's an easy way to learn more about your wastewater system for your home. Also want to mention NAURA. They're a partner with RCAP and us on this, the grant we have to do all this work. And so last year, I believe, might have been 2 years ago now, they developed this on-site wastewater treatment system user guide, and it is excellent. I recommend you go to NAURA's website and download it. It's a great guide. We're basing our class lesson on this material that we're developing on septic system or on on-site wastewater systems. And it's really a pretty complete reference done by experts who have seen everything in the field. And so, it's got a lot of different things in there, explains all the types. If you have an alarm, some systems do, what that means, how to make sure the alarm is actually working and not turned off. I mean, just it's a great guide for a homeowner on what you need to know depending on what kind of unit you have. Like if you have an aerobic treatment unit, then there's more to it. It's a more responsibility. It's like being an operator in an advanced treatment plant, much more so than if you're just feeding chlorine into a groundwater system. I'm talking on the water side here. So yeah, there is a lesson coming soon. It should have been out. Sally put a lot of work into it, and we haven't got it finalized, and that's on me. But we're working with NAURA then to develop a lesson. We have 10 lesson class. This will be the 11th lesson. We're actually going to stick it in as lesson 6, just because of the way the class flows, and it's where we had a page or two about septic systems. Now we'll have a section that's 6 to 10 pages long or so with more information. As far as testing, which is also a basic thing you need to do as a well owner, we recommend you test annually for coliform nitrate, or anytime the well's been opened or after any kind of change in taste, odor, or color. And you'd be surprised what can cause those things, whether it's a contamination event near your home, even an earthquake or a tremor. We had a well in Southern Illinois where the New Madrid Fault down in Missouri, probably 20 years ago, had a small earthquake. It changed the water level in those wells, in that well, one particular well, by 4 feet permanently. And it's because shaking the ground like that changed, it's a bedrock aquifer. It changed the way all the fractures and are connected to each other. And so it's just important to test regularly. You don't have any idea what might be causing a change in your water quality. And so what do you test for? Well, we provide a list of things, but it's for a national audience. And so you have to remember that there are some things that you don't find nationally. Some are very specific to certain areas. And so what we recommend is it's always good to contact your county or state health department or local health district and ask them if they have recommendations. Most will, some won't. But we can get you in touch with someone in your state, in your area, that will know that information if you can't find it that way. But if you even talk to your neighbors, local drillers, co-op extension, is there any unique contaminants we need to worry about, or are there any potential sources of contamination nearby that I should be concerned about? Need to understand those things before you actually test, so that you're covering something that might seem like an oddball thing, but it's important for your area. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But I mentioned sampling for coliform and nitrate annually. Doing so does not mean that your water is safe to drink. You test for coliform and nitrate because they're pretty ubiquitous in the surface environment. And if you have elevated nitrate or you have coliform bacteria, it indicates that somehow they got into your well near the surface, and they shouldn't be able to. So it's really a test of the testing for coliform and nitrate is a test to determine how well sealed your well is at the surface. That's the best way to put it. So you should do that every year. Especially if PVC well. I can think of 2 cases. One where a homeowner's son hit it with a riding lawnmower, and it cracked it down below land surface, and they didn't notice. Another where somebody planted a tree next to a PVC well, and eventually the roots got around the annulus and squeezed the casing enough that it cracked it. And there's a lot of bacteria associated with tree roots too, and so you don't want to have anything near your well. Is another reason there, but that's why you test. There's a lot of other things you should test for to make sure your well is safe, and there's a set we recommend, and then there's more things you can test for that are maybe a concern because of something local, like if you're right near an airport. Now PFAS is probably a concern that you want to deal with, as an example. So there are also places where you can find help, so you need to be inquisitive. Massachusetts DEP, they know there's a lot of arsenic and uranium in their bedrock, and so they've created this page where you can type in your address, and it will tell you if you're at risk for high or elevated arsenic or uranium. And they've got fact sheets for people in their state then, and you probably need to test for those. And if it says you don't need to, you don't need to, because it's natural in the environment, in the aquifer. And there's some areas, we have areas in Illinois that are high in arsenic, and we have other areas that aren't, that don't have any. And so it's just the geology and makeup of the elemental makeup of the Earth's crust. This is one of the examples I wanted to mention. So this is Rhode Island. And all the little dots are where there used to be orchards where they used arsenic-based pesticides for, hundreds of years or 100 years. It was used until the late 50s, early 60s. And so now that's contaminated the soil and in some cases the groundwater in those areas. And so they've identified all those. We just held a private well conference, and the person from Rhode Island was there, and she sent me an updated map, and I completely forgot to put it in this presentation. This is the map I had from before, and it's probably 10 years old. The new map isn't really that different. It still describes the same thing. But the interesting part is that big splotch in the middle. It's about a third of the state. They have natural occurring beryllium. And until I found this on their website, like I said, 10 years ago, I didn't realize beryllium was a regulated contaminant under the Safe Drinking Water Act because I've never heard of it being an issue before. And, granted, I spent most of my career just working in Illinois, but it's a pretty not common contaminant for natural groundwater. But they certainly have it here, and it does have health effects. You can go on EPA's webpage and look at their primary list of contaminants that are regulated for community water supplies, and you can find out all about beryllium. So that's why I say you need to ask and be inquisitive, because I wouldn't recommend anybody else sampling for beryllium. But then if you ask first, you may find out that that or some other thing does occur there, and it's why it's on the list. So, and there's also tools available. And so Wisconsin DNR is the agency in the state of Wisconsin that regulates well drillers and well construction, as well as the compliance of the Safe Drinking Water Act for community water supplies. And so they've sampled a lot of private wells, and they work with Stevens Point, University of Stevens Point, Wisconsin. They actually host this map, but the data, most of it comes from DNR. And so I clicked on the state that's in red, that's just below Green Bay, that's kind of highlighted there, and these two things pop up. One is the legend that tells you that, so the standard for arsenic is 10 parts per billion. For a community water supply, if it's over that, they have to treat it to remove it. They can't serve it to all the customers in their community. So nobody's drinking water greater than 10. But a private well owner, again, there are no rules. And so to know that there's certain areas of Wisconsin where it's pretty high and other areas where it's mostly below 10 is really valuable. And you can see, I clicked on this county, and so that statistics report for there shows that there's been 1,700 samples in just that county, and 534% were no detection. But we also had 4%, or actually a lot more than that, 25% or so that are above, above 25% that are above 10. So, and on the right side of that, the median is 2, the average is 35, the maximum is 15,000. So that's high enough. 15,000 parts per billion is high enough to be an acute risk. So drinking water with that much arsenic in it would make you sick. It's not a chronic problem that develops over time, which is why it's typically regulated. And it turns out they have one aquifer that's a bedrock aquifer where it's that high. So they've legislatively changed their law so that it's not legal to put a well in that aquifer. And so you have to you have to case through it, solid pipe, so that you don't have any chance of that water getting in your well, or you have to stop before you get to it. But that's what I mean. Every state is different, but this is a really cool website. You can look at all these different parameters that are listed on the left. I chose arsenic because I've done a lot of arsenic research in my career, and it's something I'm pretty interested in. So anyway, so your state may have some of these materials. Some at least have well information online, well logs, all that sort of stuff. That's the other thing to consider here is if you're looking for well information, a number of states have a GIS mapping capability like this, where you can go in and zoom in and find a dot that represents your well and then see the log. So as far as what we recommend for sampling, again, coliform nitrate annually, and then inorganics and metals basically every 3 to 5 years. Just so you know, some things, most metals like arsenic, again, I'll use that for an example. If the aquifer is fairly buried, it's not directly influenced by the surface, the water chemistry is going to be fairly standard every time. Well, I have a set of monitoring wells in a deeper sand and gravel aquifer. It's almost 200 feet to get to the top of the aquifer. And those wells are like clockwork. We sample them about every 10 years. And if a well has 3 parts per billion arsenic, it's going to be right around 3 every time we sample. If it's 45 or 50, it's going to be in that range the next in 10 years as well. It's it's a natural system. It moves slowly. Certain minerals that make up the matrix of the geologic material in that aquifer are what cause those chemistry differences. And so it just really it's worth doing to make sure that nothing's changed. And then zinc and cadmium for galvanized pipes. Some things are not an aquifer problem. Lead is rarely an aquifer problem. There's only a few places in the country where you'd find lead in well water. It's from your pipes, or the pipes come up from your well and go through your home. Lead or lead solder, and the same if you have galvanized pipes, which are allowed in some states. Zinc and cadmium can also be an issue. In fact, we had a question from on our help center from a guy who has a galvanized drop pipe for his pump. And the question was, how long does it take for a new galvanized pipe to season? Because right now it's releasing cadmium. And apparently that's a thing. I didn't know that. I had to talk to someone and find out. And so, all those things can affect your well water quality. And so it's worth, again, testing. As far as where to get it analyzed, so every state accredits labs for compliant sampling for the Safe Drinking Water Act. So communities that aren't large enough to have their own lab and get accredited will use a commercial lab to do their testing, because they have to sample every 3 months to make sure their water is meeting all the standards in the Safe Drinking Water Act. We recommend using one of those labs that have been accredited by each state. That way that they meet some minimum standards of quality in the work they do. They have to go through a whole set of tasks in order to get certified. And then again, some labs don't even deal with private wells. They'll tell you we don't take private well samples. Others do. But if you ask them questions and ask them what you need to do and they can't answer your questions, I'd find one that can, because they should be able to provide everything. They should have someone who understands well water quality and what it means to a homeowner. And so it's really on you to make sure that you are using a lab that's accredited, and that it knows what it's doing, so to speak, as well as being able to work with you after the fact if you have questions. A lot of times people will send us their water quality results because their lab couldn't answer their questions, which is fine. It's just if you pick a lab that has wherewithal to begin with, it's probably gonna be a better experience for you, especially if you get an analysis back and it says that there's something wrong. As far as interpreting the results, I'm going to show you a website that was developed by the state of New Hampshire, but you should always take your results to a health department or health professional so they can give you a qualified answer. If your arsenic's at 20 ppb, what's that really mean? I wouldn't trust your lab with that. I would, the letter of the way we evaluate that and what we tell well owners is if it's over a given standard, then you should assume it's not safe to drink. But there's other information out there. There's even for arsenic, there's discrepancy on whether 10's the right number. There's a number of states that regulate it down to 5 or 3. And so if it's in those states, if it's more than 3, I think there's one state with 3 and a couple with 5, then it has to be below that for a community water supply. And they're doing that for a reason, to protect public health. And so there's probably something good there. And so when you get a bacteria test, coliform, it's done because it's a good indicator, but you definitely need to then do an E. coli test, which is the type of coliform bacteria that causes disease, and boil your water until you can chlorinate or disinfect your well and then retest. And that was a question for this month, so I will definitely get to that in the questions as far as how to properly disinfect or chlorinate your well. So this is the tool I mentioned that you can use online. It was developed by the state of New Hampshire with funding from CDC. So you click on the little green box at the bottom, and this was developed for homeowners in New Hampshire, but anybody can use it. It's publicly available. And when you click on it, there's a place here up at the upper right side that says New Hampshire town or city with an asterisk. You have to put something in there, but you can put anonymous. And so what I did is I put in 15 micrograms per liter, which is basically the same thing as ppb, which the standard's 10. What's nice about this is most labs use standard units, but not all do. And so you may get a result that's 10 micrograms per liter, parts per billion, parts per million, milligrams per liter, and you need to make sure that the number you're putting in is correct. Like if everything else on the page was milligrams per liter, but your arsenic value was micrograms, and you put in 15 and then put milligrams per liter, that's 15,000. So this is a great tool because it gives you the chance to make sure the units match. A lot of the older ones didn't do that. And I didn't put anything else in, just arsenic to show as a demo, but it gives me the little red X. Arsenic's 15 micrograms per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, which is how it's written in the law in the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is greater than the 0.01. And so then it recommends types of treatment, which is also an advantage and handy, either RO or absorptive media. And they also have resources there for folks in New Hampshire. What's cool about this is we had our first private well conference in 2017, and we asked New Hampshire to come talk about this, and they did. And because of that, a number of other states went to New Hampshire and said, could we get this code? We want to make this for our own state. And so in the end, EPA and, oh boy, I'm skipping on a name here. The Council of Environmental States, ECOS, Environmental Council of the States, took over managing a series of pages for each state. So it basically uses the same tool, but then each state's able to go in and tailor what they'd like to include as far as resources for the well owners in their state. And so you go into this page, which I don't believe I have on this slide deck, and you can pick your state. Not every state's involved, but if your state's there, there may be resources from your state that are also valuable to you as a well owner. Yeah, so if you go down the page, it kind of tells you what kind of options you have and what that means. So the treatment options, the last gray box, it says NSF ANSI Standard 53 for arsenic absorptive media. So NSF ANSI standards are third-party certification of treatment devices that ensure that it does what it says it's going to do. So a company that's reputable will go through the standard certification process, and there's 3 certifiers that are mostly used: NSF, the Water Quality Foundation, or Water Quality Association, excuse me, and Underwriters Lab. And Underwriters Lab, if you think about it, your light bulbs used to have that UL symbol on them, and a lot of your appliances do. Those certifying groups certify everything, not just water treatment. And so you want to make sure it's certified if you buy treatment equipment. That's the point here. If it doesn't say it has a standard, it doesn't have one of the labels from one of those 3 entities, you're at risk of buying something that may be half price of the other device, but it's also not going to actually work. So I just want to point that out. Again, so as far as interpreting results, these tools are great, but they're a guide. Sometimes there's different elements or different constituents in water that can interfere or cause the water result not to be typical. So you should always take it to your health department or health professional to get a qualified answer. All those folks are there, either the environmental health folks in a county health department or local health district, or your medical doctor who's a clinician to try to ensure your safety and your health. So, and this last bullet, they cannot tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well, but they can only recommend it. That's mostly true. It used to be completely true all over the country, but recently Rhode Island passed a law to require testing at property sale. And in other states that do that, there are at least 5 others. They share the results with the buyer and the seller, and it's up to them to decide what they want to do. But in Rhode Island, they've tied it to their building inspectors program. And if you have a primary constituent from the Safe Drinking Water Act that's above an acceptable limit, you have to remediate that before the property can be sold, or the building inspector folks can condemn the property. And so basically you're being told you've got to remediate it. And so I just point that out because there's a few other local jurisdictions, like a county in New York, that also now require that kind of testing. It's starting to spread. And you should know what that means before you take it to somebody. But you can always just ask first what the rules are in your area and understand that way. And you can contact us and we can help you with that too. Okay. As far as treatment, there's a lot of reasons for treatment. I have a good friend of mine who lives out on a farm. They bought one of the carbon filters for their kitchen tap that sits, connects to the faucet because they didn't like the taste of the water. That's the only reason. And it turns out it takes out a whole bunch of things that could be health related, and they didn't buy it for that at all. But you put in other kinds of treatment, like you put in an iron removal system or an iron filter at the beginning of your house, so you don't have all your porcelain gets rusty, or sometimes there's things that cause taste problems, and so you're putting treatment in for that. Again, don't assume, test, and I say that because I've met with some homeowners where they showed me all their treatment equipment. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like $5,000 of treatment equipment here. What did you have in your water? Well, we didn't test. We just decided to make it safe. Groundwater can be perfectly safe. You should test first. It's really a waste of money. And the other side of that is some of these treatment systems, especially a filter, if you don't maintain it like you're supposed to, it can, 1, clog up, or 2, start harboring bacteria and become a source of bacterial contamination in your home. And so if you're going to add treatment, you need to follow those rules as far as how to maintain it as well. And I'll just point out here, and I might say it again, rarely, if ever, do you need a whole house purification system. And I say that meaning like an RO system. There's some things that, like you're trying to remove iron, you do that whole house, or you have a softener, you're doing that whole house. But other things that, a difference between an RO unit for under your sink and an RO unit for a home is, maybe $500 to $1,000 under your sink to $10,000 to $20,000 for your whole home, and plus all the waste it creates, because you get 1 gallon of water for every 5 treated. Yeah, you need to make sure what you're doing before you spend a lot of money that you might not need to. And again, for whole house treatment, and I just put this in here, I've run into a number of folks who have whole house RO to treat for arsenic. And, arsenic isn't a whole house issue. It's a drinking water issue. Unless it's super high, which rarely no one has. And I asked the Minnesota Department of Health for their opinion because they're health professionals and I'm not. But they really believe that there's no reason to treat for arsenic other than your drinking water. It's not a dermal problem. It's not an inhalation issue. Arsenic's rarely found at a level that could cause problems other than from drinking. So, and that's not true of every constituent, but it certainly is for that. So the message is the last sentence there. If someone recommends whole house treatment, ask why, understand why it's necessary. And again, we're more than willing to participate in any of those things. I know, yeah, just that's why we're here. As far as maintenance, no matter what your treatment is, you need to maintain it like it's on the schedule for the manufacturer. And I know sometimes people are like, well, yeah, the manufacturer's just trying to get us to buy more replacement pieces or whatever, but you need to do that and be strict about it. Because if you don't, as I mentioned, some types of filter and other things, it can cause that to become a source of contamination in your water line instead of the other way. And so, I showed earlier a picture of two look like paint rollers. One was white, one was black. Well, that's a case where, if you just have a lot of high iron in your water, that black filter, which is what that is, would have been more rust color. But when you have manganese too, which a lot of Illinois groundwater has both, that's what makes it turn that black. And it was recommended that that be replaced every 3 months. But in this person's case, they were replacing it almost every month, and it was necessary. There's just that much iron and manganese in their groundwater. And so understanding those things matters as well. Because if you see your filter looks like it's completely exhausted or things are breaking through, you need to do your due diligence there. So a little bit about the private well class. If you're not aware, again, it's 10 lessons, it's self-paced. You sign up via our website with your email, and it sends you a lesson once a week for 10 weeks with an email attachment that's a PDF of each of the 10 lessons. And so that's at privatewellclass.org. We also do a lot of other things, which I'm going to go through. You can always call us or email us when you have questions. And this is the front page. So again, the green box that says take our free class. If you click on that, we'll get to the help center later. Today's webinar is on there right now. But you can scroll down this page and see other things that we do, like we write helpful blog posts on things that homeowners can do. So when you click on that, take our free class, it brings you this page. We have 3 programs. We have not only our private well program, but we have a community water supply program and a decentralized wastewater program, which is septic tanks or advanced home treatment. And so you can click on for information for either of those or any of those, and then when you enroll, you'll get those lessons same time every week. If you signed up at 7 o'clock at night on a Friday, you'll get an email every 7 p.m. on a Friday for 10 weeks, probably actually 11, because you get an evaluation at the end too. The entire class is available in Spanish. It doesn't get a lot of traffic, but if you work with or know of native Spanish-speaking well owners, homeowners, let them know that this is available. All of the figures in the lessons have been converted to Spanish as well. A couple of the videos, but not all of them. We obviously can't maintain both sites at the same level, but it's there. It's a resource. And if you have questions about that, you can always email us as well. So for each of the lessons, we have this resource library that are publicly available, free documents that are part of the basis for the lesson, as well as additional material that might help you understand what's in the lessons. We didn't want to make them too long. They're all 6 to 10 pages. And for every person that in the evaluation that says 7 days isn't enough time, I need more time to read this, we have someone else who says, can I get them faster than every 7 days? And so we've left it there the entire time we've been doing this. But anyway, if you click on any of these, they take you to a lot of really good information about either groundwater or basics. And as you go through each, so lesson 1 is called the science of groundwater. Lesson 2 is groundwater and well contamination. And they really talk about some of the sources and how they get there. And as you move through, it's best practices, treatment, all those things. We also record every webinar. So for instance, we did one in June 2023 on outreach strategies. We recently redid this, and I didn't update this slide, but it's only the second time a few months ago. But it's really meant for professionals on how to do outreach to well owners in your area. Well owners are a tricky bunch to work with, is the best way to say it, because especially when you work nationally, they come from every demographic: wealthy, poor, educated, uneducated, rural, urban. There's private wells everywhere. And a well owner can be from literally any demographic group. And so how you reach those can be very different depending on their life story, if you will. We also, funding and financing options, unfortunately, there's not very many. And this hasn't been updated since 2023 because nothing has changed on the landscape yet. The new Farm Bill, which I'm not 100% sure it hasn't been passed, but I don't think so, hasn't been any big notice, has new language in it that'll allow USDA to provide funding, not only for wells and septic, which they do now, but also hopefully change the criteria for who can get that funding. Right now, it's at 60% of the local poverty level, which is so low that most well owners, even those who can't afford to get a new well or install treatment or whatever, can't afford or don't qualify. And so that's hopefully going to change. I think the last version that we're aware of, it was going to go back to at least 100%, and they were lobbying for it to go higher than 100% of the poverty level, because they have all these funds allocated and then they end up not spending them all because there aren't enough well owners who qualify who need that help. But there are local issues and local areas where they have different funding or financing options. I know I mentioned Iowa has a Grants to Counties program. Their legislature provides money to each of their county health departments to cost share abandoning wells, testing, and a lot of other things that they work with their well drillers then to do. And so it saves the homeowner quite a bit of money. Most of the time there's still a cost, but it might be half or less. And so there's things like that. If you're in Iowa, it's helpful. If you're anywhere else, it's not. I wish every state had a Grants to Counties program, but that's just not the way it is. But there's a lot of those things. Or there may be a local health district or even a soil and water conservation district that offer support. I know before the pandemic in Illinois, the soil and water conservation districts had some allocated money from the Department of Ag to cost share abandoning old wells that weren't in use anymore. And so, you just got to look and ask. Also for lead, we did a webinar in 2016 and then again in 2018, and it's available. There's really no reason to redo that. All the material that's in there is still relevant. Any home that's before 2014 could have lead solder at levels that could be a risk if your water is corrosive or aggressive. Any home before 1984, you need to understand if it might have lead pipes. But if your water is corrosive, that's what causes the lead to leach out of those pipes or copper. But if it's not, then you have no issue. And so we see both. Right? We see some water that's got it's more corrosive, more alkaline, lower pH, and other that are not alkaline, lower pH, and there's other factors that can influence that. And then we see others where it's not, and instead it forms scale. So having lead pipes in your home doesn't mean that you are leaching lead. You have to test and see what that is. And all the testing of your water, knowing the pH and some of the other factors, how much chlorine's in it and whatever else, help you or help determine whether or not your water might be corrosive and leaching lead. We actually have a page with material. This was a really big deal when it first came out, as far as a lot of older homes that do have lead pipes or galvanized pipe, and so we put together these resources luckily it can be removed with a filter. So there's was a lot of testing being done on some of those systems at EPA through their Office of Research and Development, and they found that many of them work much better than required to be certified. So we also have a number of videos that are just about a particular topic. What to do after a flood. What should I know about a shared well? One thing I've learned through the 12 years we've been doing this program is there are a lot more wells that are shared by more than one home than I would have ever realized. But some places there's a lot. And if there's no agreement, it's not in the deed, it's all being done by a handshake, whether somebody's paying somebody else or not. As soon as a pump fails, or as soon as there's a water quality problem, neighbors become not neighborly anymore. And we've had a number of those calls where there's nothing in place, no kind of agreement signed or anything. Somebody buys a house, it's the property that actually has the well on it, and they don't want the responsibility of providing water to all their neighbors. So they tell their neighbors they're not going to do that anymore. So all of a sudden, these other homes don't have a water supply, and so that's why it's a bigger issue than I would have ever realized. Why does my well keep losing pressure? Pressure tanks are a particular problem. We have another video that's called "How Does My Pressure Tank Work?" And it's by far the most viewed video we have. These were put up in 2016, so they're dated now. I mean, so it's been some time, but it's well over 400,000 views of that other video, and it leads the pace for the ones we have up. So, and it just tells us there's not a lot of good information out there about how your pressure tank works and what a homeowner can do to change that. If you don't have enough pressure, or you added on to your home like a second level or extended a second level, it takes pressure to lift water. And so if your pressure tank's not set in the right spot and the low end pressure is too low, you're going to have pretty poor water pressure. It's just the way it is. And we have a podcast. So we're up to 48 podcasts. We've had 4 seasons of 12. This podcast is called Tap Talk, the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. It's at drinkingwaterpodcast.org. We don't just interview people who are involved in private wells. We interview people who are involved in wastewater and drinking water, the water industry, but we have a number of these that are specific to private wells, including these 4. And Dr. McDonald Gibson on the bottom there, you're going to see her picture again in a few minutes. And Dr. Wolf is the head of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital. He deals with not simple cases of solving children's health problems that sometimes end up being because of their well. And so he's a very good advocate for testing for private wells and has a lot of credibility in the industry as well as with pediatricians. He's on a board for the American Academy of Pediatrics and has had a long, successful career. So I encourage you, if you are interested in podcasts, there's some good information there between the 48 that we've got done. So, and our help center, this just launched in April of 24. Sally Dolan and Aaron Huggett, who are both on the call, and I neglected to put on a slide, which I'm sorry, manage that. And so the Help Center it's a really comprehensive tool, not only a phone number and a email address, but also a chat bot that uses the resources we've put together for times when we're not there, and it actually gives really great answers because it's using our materials to provide those answers. And then I know Aaron and Sally end up calls we get over the weekend and stuff. They're calling people on Monday, and we've had quite a range of questions. But in addition to that, Sally mostly put together these articles. And so you can go on, when you click on the Help Center, it brings you to this page. So you can call us, you can ask the chat box, you can email us. And the email address is on there now, and I don't have it on this picture. But you can also search on your own. And so there's about 150, they're called articles, but an article is basically the title is a question, all the material underneath that is the answer. And so it's really helpful. And what it's done for us is we don't get calls asking what to test for. People find that in this knowledge base. Instead, we get questions like, how long is it going to take my my pipe to season, my galvanized pipe to season, which, those are much more complicated answers that require us to do a little more work. So when you type in a word like flood, is my well safe after a flood comes up, here's all the different articles that show some of those things that have flood in it. If you click on is my well safe after a flood, that's actually, this is the text to one of the videos that we have that are like the shared well video. And so it talks about what you need to do, how to take care of that beforehand. And they're saying, with a lot of these videos, to get prepared before a forest fire, even, things like that. So the bottom line for all this is, our job is to help make you as a well owner more aware and to understand the basics of what it means to be, you're the water operator of a small water supply, your own, and it's the one protecting your family. So you need to see if you can find your log. And on that log, hopefully, if you have it or can get it, you'll know where your water's coming from, meaning you know the depth of the well, the pump where it's set at, if it has a screen or not, if it's in sand and gravel or bedrock, or if it's a dug large diameter well. Understanding you might have, and I don't talk about that in this particular webinar, but the same 200-foot well is extremely different in where water's coming from if it's in sand and gravel and has a screen at the bottom versus if it's in bedrock and it's an open hole at the bottom. One has 200 feet of casing. The other one could only have 30 or 40 feet of casing or less if it's an older well, and water can get in at any depth. So understanding all those things and learning to ask, then the idea is when you have issues or questions, you know enough that you can ask much more informed questions, and you know who the contacts are locally or at your state. The folks like at a DNR or a DEQ or the State Geological Survey or the USGS, they know a lot about geology and groundwater and wells, and they're 99% of the time they're very helpful. They know who the other contacts you might need are, or they know someone who's an expert in a particular thing. And so you just have to be willing to ask. And then lastly, hopefully it's clear you need to sample your well regularly to understand and ensure your water, the water you're providing your family is safe. And that's really our goal, right? Is to help you understand why your well is important, why you really need to know how it works. So when something goes wrong, you have some idea of what it might take to deal with it. And then what things you can do to help protect you and your family from risk of adverse water quality and potentially health problems. So we're going to go to the questions that you all asked in advance. I didn't answer all of them, but we didn't get as many as we typically do. So I was able to answer most of them. And so, and again, I'll mention here that if you have questions that have come up because of something I've said today or something you just thought of that you want to ask, put it in the question box or the chat box on your GoToWebinar window. Katie is tracking all those. She's going to put that in a shared Google document that I can pull up on the screen at the end, and we'll go through those. Like I said, no guarantees that I can answer those. And if I can't, I'll ask you to email me so I can find you an answer and then get back to you. Okay, so oil and gas concerns. What are the critical chemicals to test for to determine if my well has been contaminated by oil or natural gas? Well, natural gas isn't considered really a health risk. It's an explosion risk. If there's enough of it and if it's high enough levels that it's a concern in your home, that's really the risk, is that it could build up and eventually blow up. Because we see natural gas both from natural occurring formations and from stored natural gas. And the real risk there isn't to your health per se. And if it's that extensive, you'll see sputtering or spitting water and air out of your faucet. You've seen pictures of people who can turn on their water and put a match down there and it poofs a blue flame. My cousins were in an area where there's a lot of organic matter on top of the aquifer. They had a lot of methane in their well, and they actually had a small hole in the top of the well with a little pipe and to vent that off, and they lit it, and I mean, it's lit 24/7. It's burning natural gas, but it's not per se a health concern on its own. By contrast, oil products, gas, gasoline, diesel, whatever it might be, they're volatile organic compounds, VOCs, they're hydrocarbons, and you need to test for VOCs, would be the only way to know. A lot of times they are expensive tests, and so we liken that to testing for, even now, for PFAS. It's rarely found, or it's found at very low levels unless you know of a source. And so if you had a buried tank and you're in a rural area, or you're near a gas station, or there was a known spill, whatever it might be, or even near an oil field, I guess would be another reason. you can test for that then. But in most cases, if you have, if any of that, like a buried tank that's everyone's forgot about from 50 years ago, there's literally hundreds of thousands of those around the country. You'll notice. It'll have a sheen in the water. It'll have a smell. It'll feel different. But if it's very low levels, maybe not. So if you think you have a reason to test, that's what we recommend to people. The same with pesticides. It really, just because pesticides are applied, say within 50 feet of your well or 100 feet of your well, doesn't mean you're at risk for pesticide contamination of your well. It really depends on how your well is constructed and where you're getting your water from in your well. If it's near the surface, then yeah. If it's a buried sand and gravel aquifer here, like we have in where I live, there's clay for almost 200 feet, and then you have sand and gravel. And so there's a screen at 200 feet, so water can get in the well, and you're pumping from this lower sand and gravel unit. But there's absolutely no way, unless it's around the well bore, that pesticides are making their way down to that aquifer and getting in your well. So, but if you have an old dug well, then those are certainly a risk. So you need to understand those things, what potential sources might be, and the information about your well before you actually determine if you're at risk for that kind of contamination. And again, sometimes it's a personal choice. I more than agree that if you're concerned and you want to test, you should test. It's just that some people, that's going to be a lot of money, and if there's not a decent reason to be concerned about it, then I would probably think twice. Okay, so where do I send samples? If you Google EPA certified labs, there's a list, and this web page has changed since we've had a new administration. So there used to be a map, and you could click on your state and all that stuff, but the information's still the same. If you go to this page about certification of labs for drinking water, every state has a certification program that's required by the EPA for the folks that do compliance in your state for public water systems. So a community water supply or a non-community water supply, which would be like a business or a school that has its own wells, they're required to test regularly under the Safe Drinking Water Act because they're providing water to other people. So that says state certification, that first PDF that you can click on, it has a link to every website for every state. And like if you go to the Illinois EPA from this thing, it takes you to the page where they list all the labs that are certified for either bacterial, chemical, or both. And you can find labs that way. And they're all certified, which means that they should be able to do a good job. And there's these days, because of overnight shipping and all that stuff, many organizations provide certified testing in many states. So you may have a lab in Ohio that you can use in Illinois for compliance testing, and that's up to you. But you can also find local labs if you'd rather deliver things in person and all that stuff. And so this is that list. When you click on it, so you can find labs on their pages, and I didn't go into that anymore. We do that in a different webinar. I also want to mention there are online services that make it really convenient. They ship you a sample kit with a return label. They give you instructions, the bottles, and even an ice pack to freeze overnight. You collect the sample in the morning, you seal up the box, you take it to UPS, and they send it to a lab that's nearby. It might not even be in your state. I know I did this to test it out, and the lab we sent samples to was actually in Iowa, but it gets there the next day. If you're doing bacteria, it needs to be there the next day. And so we started working with one of those groups. It's called MyTapScore. It's actually, the company is Simple Labs. We're actually going to eventually offer testing through them because they have contracts with several hundred labs, and because of the volume, they're able to offer at a lower cost. So they can offer the same analysis. Our lab here at the Water Survey used to offer sampling for residents in Illinois for free. and that ended when we came to the U of I in 2008. And now, because the U of I requires full cost recovery, our lab, it's more expensive because we're a smaller lab and don't have the volume than it would be through somebody else like a commercial lab. So we've stopped offering private well analysis and sampling, although that may change. But like my TAP score offers basically the same test, and it's significantly cheaper than what we can offer. And so that's why to me, it's a benefit to homeowners and well owners to offer that kind of service, because we don't have any other option now. And so that's where we're headed. And there's other services out there. There's certainly, I know one of the RCAP folks told me about a lab in Wisconsin that they all send samples to now because they gave them a really good rate and they could get it cheaper there. So it's a matter of, but they're also doing volume. Every well assessment comes with a sample analysis free. And so they're doing, 400 to 600 samples every year among all the RCAP regions. And so a lot of them are sending them to that same lab. And so that's really your options. If you're right near a lab, like a lab that's been around forever in Illinois is in Peoria, it's a PACE lab now. A lot of people take their samples there. We certainly encourage that. But if you're more remote or it's not easy for you to get to a place, we have to be there before 5 and you have to get there the next day, some of these other options might work out for you. So shot chlorination, how do you chlorinate a well properly? Let me say that you should only disinfect, chlorinate your well when it needs it. So, and you know that because you sampled and it shows you've got bacteria, and I mean coliform or E. coli. Otherwise, if it's clean, doesn't have any bacteria or no pathogenic bacteria, then you don't need to chlorinate. There's no reason to do it. And we've heard every story. I mean, I had a well owner tell me up in Northern Illinois that their contractor told them just to pour a cup of bleach down their well once a month and it'd be fine. That is the worst advice you can give somebody. Chlorine's an oxidant, so it leaches metals, and it doesn't have enough chlorine to actually do any good to kill anything that might be in the well. It's got to be done the right way. So we looked at probably 60 or 70 different booklets, if you will, brochures, bulletins, whatever you want to call them, on how to disinfect a well. Some were half a page long, some were 20 pages long. The one that I felt was the best and most comprehensive as far as providing the right information, taking you step by step, all that stuff is again from the Minnesota Department of Health. And this is actually well and water system disinfection for private wells. You can get to that. I showed you those resources earlier where lesson 1 and lesson 2, and you had all those different documents you could click on. Under lesson 10 is this document. And I say to go there because after this came out, probably in 2014 or so, maybe a little sooner, a few years later, Minnesota went through they hired marketers or something to try to make their materials more readable. And they changed this document from an 8-page document to like a 3-page document. And to me, the 3-page one is much worse. It doesn't, it isn't as good. It doesn't provide all the same detail. It doesn't talk about potential things you might run across. And so we kept a copy of this, and this is what we still provide everybody. And I've actually had one of the staff at Minnesota tell me they didn't like it either, that they prefer the old one, but they didn't have a choice. And so you can find that on our website, and it's downloadable. It walks you through what to do. And you mix chlorine, you don't pour it straight into a well. It's too concentrated at that level. So it walks you through step by step. If you've got treatment devices, it tells you to find out from the manufacturer which ones need to be taken offline. So you shouldn't run chlorine through them, and which can still be left online, all that stuff. So it's pretty handy. And a little bit more about that though, shot chlorination is used whenever you find bacteria in your well. It doesn't always solve the problem. And there's a number of things that that could be why. So natural groundwater always has bacteria in it. There's methanogenic bacteria, sulfate reducing bacteria, iron bacteria, a lot of different things that are not pathogenic. They don't make you sick, and they're just naturally in the water. Between that and it being natural groundwater, most homes that have private well water have biofilms, which are, the gunky green stuff that starts building up on your pipes on the inside. And if that's the case and you have biofilm, when you chlorinate, you might kill off the upper layer, but there's plenty of bacteria still underneath. And sometimes you need to do that 2 or 3 times. And it might solve the problem. And sometimes that still doesn't solve the problem. And if it doesn't, it could be that you have a continuous source. So I mentioned earlier, there could be like a little thin sand lens that runs from underneath your septic drain field to your well. If that's the case, then you're going to just keep feeding more in. No matter how many times you chlorinate, you're bringing in contaminated water from the aquifer itself or from the geologic material around your well. And so if that's the case, or like the well that's in a feedlot, you're not going to have safe water there. It's just, really your choices are put in a different well or add continuous disinfection. And that means adding a chlorinator in your home as a treatment device, or UV is an option, ultraviolet light. And both of those have pluses and minuses. And one thing that's a minus for chlorine is chlorine works better at low pHs, and we have natural groundwater that can be above 8. And at that level, chlorine isn't effective. You can add 4 times the chlorine that's recommended by Minnesota, and it's still not going to take care of the bacteria because it just is at the wrong, the chemistry is not there for it to cause the reactions to occur. And so, and this says waiting on VT research to get better guidance for well owners. I'm not sure that's going to happen. They put out some good information in the several papers in the literature about what the best practices are. One that I was hoping I would get some formal confirmation is a great idea is to use white vinegar in the well to lower the pH for the well, for the water that's in the well and in your home when you're doing the disinfection. Because the right way to do chlorination is to mix it in 5-gallon buckets based on the size of the well and the amount of water in your well. Once you got that in there, then you run a hose from an outside spigot or a spigot on the outside of your house back into the well, and you let it run. So you're basically recirculating the water. And you do that to make sure you're getting all of the well components that are in the well chlorinated, and you know it's well mixed. And then once you've done that, then you go into your home and you turn on every faucet, flush every toilet, turn on every shower until you smell chlorine, then you shut it off and you leave it overnight. Now you've got chlorinated water in all of your lines. It's sitting in those pipes, in theory, killing bacteria. And sometimes if it's really, like I said, if it's really bad, there's a lot, or if you have a lot of biofilm, it may not get all of it or whatever. And then the next day you flush it all out till you don't smell chlorine anymore, and pump to waste from your hose. And then all the chlorine should be gone, as well as the bacteria in theory. So that's the proper way. And just be aware that it doesn't always work. And there's drilling companies who specialize in how to deal with some of those. And there's one company that's in the Chicago area. They do about 1,000 chlorinations a year, and they're not always using chlorine. Sometimes they went out there a number of times and they find there's a dead end line. Or if you have a dead end line that doesn't have water moving through it, but it's full of water because of pressure, that stagnant water is going to grow biofilms and bacteria and everything else. And you're always going to have a problem in those cases. So yeah, that's how you do it. So does manganese stay at a fairly constant value if you live in an area without any industrial major farm pollution? What other factors might influence manganese changes? Can draw speed and how fast you're pumping the water from the well aquifer change the level of manganese? So we see, I mentioned this earlier, we see that in most aquifers that aren't directly influenced by surface water, because the chemistry changes a lot, even after every storm. you may see a difference. But a deeper aquifer, an aquifer that's either confined or protected in some way from a direct influence, that the metals seem to be pretty consistent. I mentioned I have a network of wells in a deep sand and gravel aquifer. The one that's 3 is always around 3. The one that's 30 is always around 30. One of them's like 120. It's always around 120. So it's pretty consistent, and we see that, and that's for arsenic, not for manganese. But we see that with metals, same with iron, and so I'm assuming it's the same with manganese. If you have it, it's there. It's a chemistry that allows it to be released, and so we know that when you add chlorine, it's an oxidant. There's that really good USGS study where this was like in New Mexico or Arizona, where they were using these chlorine tablets in wells and then tried different types of chlorine, putting it directly in the well. And it's a bedrock aquifer that has a lot of metals in it, in the rock itself. And they saw, in some cases, 10-fold or 100-fold increases in metals in the water by putting that chlorine in there. And so that's a short-term thing, though. If you're shock chlorinating, I want to point that out, because in the end, you've pulled all the chlorine out again. You're not leaving it in the system. You're pumping it out and back to its natural groundwater. You're just trying to kill all the bacteria. But we've also learned that it depends on the chemistry and how reducing the conditions are. So, water can be more, there's a scale for how reducing it is as far as, or oxidizing it might be. And we see different bacteria whenever there's different constituents in the water. So what we learned for the Mahomet Aquifer in Illinois, which is a large sand and gravel aquifer that covers 11 states or 11 counties, when there was still sulfate in the water, there were sulfate reducing bacteria in the groundwater, and there was hardly any arsenic. And for any other well where the sulfate had disappeared, a different kind of bacteria, a methanogenic bacteria, had become the dominant bacteria in the groundwater, and all the arsenic was being released. And so the paper's still cited. It's from the early 90s. A young grad student at the time in geology worked with us in our wells and did all that work. It's really interesting, but bacteria can mediate whether things are released. And I've learned since then that bacteria in wells can also affect chemistry and what might be released from the aquifer materials. And so it's all interrelated, so it's kind of complicated. But to answer your question, there certainly are things that could affect it. I don't know what those are per se, but certainly the water chemistry and if there's bacteria likely have some kind of effect. So, okay. What type of filter removes forever chemicals? So, a few weeks ago, we had Jackie McDonald Gibson and Jennifer Hopenick Redman do our monthly webinar for May. That was on May 29th. Jackie's the head of civil engineering at NC State, North Carolina State University, and Jennifer's at RTI International, which is a research triangle that's in Raleigh, and it's really a cool place. A lot of startups and cutting edge type research done there. But Jackie and Jennifer were part of a large EPA study looking at PFAS in private wells. We did record that. So this is just the title slide. I'm going to show one other one, I think, to answer this question. But I encourage you to watch it. It's on, you can find it on our website under our webinars or on our YouTube channel to watch it full screen under our webinar playlist. It's the top one there right now just because it's the last one we did. But they talked about their study and what well owners can do. And, I'm not a PFAS expert. I know enough to tell people what to look out for. I've learned from Jackie that in other instances where there seems to be no source nearby, they found in some cases that it's the septic system that's actually allowed PFAS to get into the groundwater system. But it's persistent, right? And water is only one source of potential exposure. And if you watch the webinar, that's fully explained how that risk actually compares to some other things like our food and clothing and cookware and having a source nearby. So this is also one of their slides, and this is what they suggest, and it's really the best advice I can give, because the guidance, this is pretty specific. Activated carbon if it's less than 200 parts per trillion, which the standards now for a public water supply are much lower than that. So if it's that high, but if it is higher, then they recommend reverse osmosis. So that, yeah, and I honestly don't remember what she said for why. The one thing we did learn in this webinar, though, is that activated carbon has an issue that's not well documented yet, that if you have radon in your water, it'll collect on the carbon, and eventually your carbon filter could become dangerous, radioactive. And I'd forgotten that from a talk that we had at our 2019 private well conference, and someone reminded me. And that's kind of a side issue. We're talking about PFAS here, but I guess it bothers me that I didn't remember or realize that, because that's a big deal. Because now you have, what are you going to do with it once it's spent? Okay, determining sources. Are well owners able to learn how to diagnose the source of contamination? Are there certain areas to check first, or is it advised to just reach out to a licensed plumber or driller? Well, so going back to this diagram, these are some things you can look for on your own. Understanding what kind of pipes you have in your home, all those things that I mentioned earlier. But depending on what your contaminant is, it may not be a plumber or driller that you need to talk to. It might be a hydrologist, a geologist, a microbiologist. We're actually investigating Legionella in homes with private wells. The verdict's still out yet, whether that's a risk or not, but it could be. And, that's a very different animal than having lead pipes, so to speak. So you should start with your local support, your local health district, state agencies, and RCAP can come out and do an assessment. It's free, and a water test. And you can also contact us. I'm not saying that because a licensed plumber or well driller won't have the answer, but we can certainly tell you who's the best class of professional that you want to talk to, and you'll know that before you go spend the money. I've had different professionals contact me and say, hey, I was asked this question. It's really out of our wheelhouse. Can you help us out? And so we certainly do that for professionals too, because a plumber isn't going to know about geology necessarily, and a well driller will probably know about plumbing, but they're not going to understand some of the microbiology necessarily. There's a few that do, but some don't. So it depends, again, on the experience of those folks as well. So I think the best route to go is that way. And you find someone who's pretty knowledgeable, and they're consistently a good resource, and they always answer your questions. That's what I tell people who want to do what I do they need to be. You need to always be willing to take the questions. You need to always be willing to find the answers. You need to become a trusted source. And when we teach people how to do outreach to well owners, we try to tell them, you can't just go get a grant for 2 years and do all this work and then walk away, because the homeowner is going to have a question in 5 years, and they're going to call you. And if you don't give them the time of day, then your credibility's shot for you and your agency. And so that's, if you can find the right person, that's great. Someone who's an advocate for you and all that stuff, and that's what we really need. And they'll know, where this is headed, or willing to find out for you. Going back to that, I rely on a ton of people all over the country, including folks like Jackie on PFAS. There's just too much to know, in all honesty. And it's important to start a network and develop contacts and understand those things. So, okay, ag chemicals. What's the likelihood of surface runoff reaching groundwater and carrying possible contaminants to private wells? So again, the risk really depends on well type, proper construction, and well depth. I left that off here, huh? And what aquifer your water is coming from. So it's the superficial and aquifer geology, because you can have, as I mentioned, if bedrock's at the surface, you might have, these days, most states require at least 50 feet of casing, but I've run across bedrock wells that are 200 or 300 feet deep, but they only have 20 feet of casing. The rest of it's an open hole. So water can get in that well anywhere from 20 feet on down. It's just a borehole. And that's the way you drill a bedrock well, because you're not getting water from in between sand grains. You're getting water from the cracks and fissures in the rock. So if you case that off, water can't get in. Versus a sand and gravel well that's 200 feet deep, it has 5 feet of screen at the bottom. That's the only place water can come in the well. So you have 195 feet of solid casing, so you're much more protected from anything at the surface. And so understanding those things, you can have a well that's right next to a farm field if it's deep and properly constructed, and it's, you know, the water's coming from fairly far down, and you know it's, you know, there's no chance of runoff getting to the well directly. You know, all that matters because being next to a farm field doesn't mean you have a pesticide issue. That's the bottom line. I show this. This is a diagram that's in our lessons, or will be. It's a new one we had made from some old figure, but I grew up on a farm, and my dad was pretty old school, and we had this old building that was full of so many different things. And he hired a guy to come with a bulldozer and dig a big hole and buried the whole thing in it and left it. And it's right up gradient from our well. True story. So that's the perfectly wrong thing to do. So yeah, but that happened a lot 50 years ago. So you need to know, if you buy a house, especially in the country that used to be a farmstead, what the history is there, if there's any way to find it. You know, most folks like us had a gas tank. FS came out and filled our tank up once every 2 or 3 months, and we had our gas at home. And I know we had a aluminum 7-Up can with the lid torn off as the cap for that nozzle. So yeah. Is it okay to have a landscaping irrigation system for a home on a private well? You know, I'm assuming that the well can produce that much water. That's the first thing, right? And assuming it does, then it's really about the water quality. Most of the time it's going to be fine, but you should probably test it just to make sure that whatever you're putting on isn't, you know, doing something to the soil or causing some other issue. And extension would probably be a good group to go to, Cooperative Extension Service in your state, for that kind of question. And then also, if you're out west, especially, you know, prior appropriation states, you may not have a right to use that much water. I know there's a lot of water law out west and limits on who can use what. And that's just going to get worse as water struggles continue out there. So those would be the only considerations I would think you'd have. You know, it's a lot. You certainly don't want to use city water to irrigate if you don't have to, because it's going to cost you a lot of money. Okay, so that's the questions. I'd hope to have a little more time because we're almost on 2 hours, but I'm going to pull up. Let me find it here. It looks like we have a couple questions. Okay. And I'm assuming everybody can see that?
Yep.
Thank you. Stephen, as a writer who specializes in helping communities secure funding through grant writing, I'm curious, are there programs or partnerships currently in place to help individuals or small communities access funding for well care? And if not, would there be interest in collaborating with a grant writer to support these efforts? So as I mentioned, the USDA program is probably the biggest one out there, and they have several programs to help folks, especially lower income. I know the NGWA has a program called Water Well Wish that's specifically for people who don't qualify for the USDA funding because their income may be a little above that, but they still have a need. Otherwise, it's very hit or miss as far as, you know, the community thing is a much different animal, right, than individuals. So I know in some parts, especially in the East, we have a lot of states like New Hampshire where there are many small towns that don't have a water system. They have all private wells. And so that's a little different. We don't have as much of that here in Illinois and the Midwest. A community of 150 homes likely has a water system, not on private wells here. But I'd be glad to talk to you about it. We're funded through grants. That's how we do. That's how our programs have operated. We have a sister program called wateroperator.org. That's for small water and wastewater systems, centralized systems, and it's specifically to help those small towns that maybe have 500 people and they struggle because they don't have the economies of scale to really maintain their system as all the new laws come up and all the testing requirements and all those things. But I'd be glad to talk to you and learn more about what you're doing. I personally enjoy the grant writing part of our job. Yeah, we do a lot of it to support continuing this work. So hopefully that's an answer. There just aren't a lot of things out there, especially for private well owners. Okay. And you'll get an email in an hour or so after this is over. It'll have my return email on it, so you'll have my email address. Yeah. We are a water treatment business that works a lot on residential wells. Can we share some of our resources on your website or info marketing materials? We don't do that. It's been, honestly, I mentioned today, it's probably the first time I've mentioned it on a webinar, that we plan to work with MyTapScore or Simple Labs. And I've wrestled with that decision for probably 3 or 4 years. And the bottom line is, it's really a great program because they use certified labs. They also have enough economy of scale that they can offer a water sample to a homeowner cheaper than an individual lab can. And it's a benefit to the labs because now they don't have to do anything but the analysis. They don't have to have a well expert. They don't have to ship the bottles. So it's basically streamlined it all. So it's cheaper for a homeowner. They get a better answer if they have problems or questions. And, other than that, we don't allow anyone on this program or a water operator program. We don't support engineering firms. We don't support vendors. We work as a nonprofit. We're actually a university entity. We're an institute on campus. And so we're very fortunate that we can offer all of our services for free, but we can't offer any water testing for free. That's, there's just not money in the cards for that. And so what I've decided, or we've decided, is that's probably the best option if we're going to do anything at all. And a lot of well owners request, where should I get my well tested? So, and people, I encourage them to look at all the options. We're not trying to sole source anything. It's a struggle for me that in the end, we're going to help benefit a company, but it's a good company. It started out as a startup out of Berkeley with the idea of a PhD student. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, because even we have a conference. It's going to be every year now, and it's for professionals, not for well owners. And we struggle because under our EPA grant, we can't pay for food. And a 3-day conference without any coffee or, popcorn in the afternoons for breaks is a pretty sad conference. So we've paid for that internally. I've convinced powers that be here at the State Water Survey to help with that. And we're running into a problem now because of all the changes with federal funding that potentially we won't be able to do that for our conference next year in 2026. And one of the ideas we're entertaining, and it's not something honestly that I want to do, would be to offer an opportunity for others to pay for a break and get recognition for it. And so that's as close as we've come so far. Okay, is there a good setback for a propane tank from a well? Offhand, I don't know that. And one thing I forgot to mention related to that picture that showed all the different distances and stuff is those are Minnesota's rules. Every state has something like that. or almost every state. Any state that's got well construction code has a diagram or a list of required setbacks and a list of what things you're required to set back from. Some lists will be shorter than others, some will be longer than others, and the distance will be different. Some states it's 100 feet from your septic, or if it's a vulnerable geology, it might have to double. It'd be 200 feet, which, for a small lot, that's not going to be very likely or possible. So then they get a variance. I mean, it all depends on where you live, and whether propane tanks are one of those items probably depends on which state you're in. So it's just, you don't want a truck driving by your well when you have to have that filled or whatever, but it's typically going to be close to your home. Maybe you've added something to use as propane for backup in case there's power outages. I know when we had a generator, I grew up, it wasn't a real fancy one like today. It was one, it was on a piece of plywood and we had to carry out to our light pole, but we still had one. And so, it may be that, your wells, your propane tank's already there. I'm not even sure what risks that poses for a well necessarily, other than, trying to get it filled or having equipment near it. So, but we see, crazy things like using that as to tie their dogs up and well head, so yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look. And again, you're better off looking in your state well construction code. All right. Thank you, everyone. That's still on. And yeah, everyone have a good rest of your week.